Hello everyone. Welcome to my lecture summary for process costing. This topic tends to give students in managerial accounting the most difficulty, so I made this video to distill its contents into as simple a process as possible. I've also included animations to help you visualize what is actually happening in process costing. You will find the workbook solutions in a different video, but watching this one will help you tremendously. Let us begin. Process costing distinguishes itself from job order costing in that it does not trace or allocate its cost to individual job orders, but manufacturing departments instead. Your textbook uses an ice cream manufacturer called Frozen Delights. If you've ever made homemade ice cream before, you're perhaps familiar with the process. You start with your ingredients: milk, cream, sugar, and flavoring, which you put inside a bucket of sorts. You also put in some ice to cool those ingredients. You then mix them together until they reach your desired temperature and consistency. The process for a large-scale manufacturer is not that different, just with much more ingredients and larger machines. You start with your various ingredients: milk, cream, sugar, etc., which is requisitioned by the mixing department. The mixing department churns them together while lowering their temperatures. Once the product is finished in the mixing department, it is transferred to the packaging department. The packaging department will also requisition some materials as well. Once the ice cream is finished being packaged, it is transferred to storage. To track these costs incurred by each department, manufacturers use a cost of production report to summarize the production and cost data. This report calculates the units of product for which the department is accountable and how those units are disposed. It also summarizes how the costs incurred are allocated between the units that were transferred out and the units still in process as of the end of the period. Let's demonstrate what the cost of production report actually does. These three boxes represent the beginning inventory of the mixing department. The first cost we incur will finish beginning inventory so that it's ready to go to packaging. After transferring beginning inventory to packaging, we start our next batch. Some of the next batch will be completed and moved to packaging as well. We'll refer to this inventory as units started and completed. Our cost of production report takes all the costs incurred during the period and allocates them to the inventory transferred out and the inventory not yet finished in the mixing department. The inventory not transferred out is the department's ending inventory, and it was not transferred out because it is only partially completed. That is the ultimate purpose of the cost of production report: to allocate costs incurred to finish our beginning inventory, the inventory we started and completed during the period, and ending inventory. How we build the cost of production report is a four-step process. Step 1. We need to determine the units to be assigned costs. Step 2. Calculate something called the equivalent units of production. Step 3. Determine the cost per equivalent unit. And step 4. Allocate those costs to units transferred out and those still in ending inventory as shown in the previous slide. To prepare a cost of production report requires a cost flow assumption. Just as you learned in financial accounting for merchandise inventory, we can assume either a first in, first out, last in, first out, or average cost flow. First in, first out most commonly matches the actual flow of our manufacturing inventory, so that's the assumption I'll cover. I'll also give a quick primer on the average cost flow assumption for process costing. Don't worry, it's just like the FIFO method with a few minor tweaks. Building the cost of production report begins with the following data being provided. We see that beginning inventory has a dollar value of $6,225, $5,000 of which is the cost of direct materials, and $1,225 is the conversion cost. The actual quantity of beginning inventory is 5,000 gallons of ice cream, which is 70% complete with respect to conversion costs. Next, we have the current month's production costs. Direct materials, $66,000, direct labor, $10,500, and overhead, $7,275. These are the costs of the 60,000 gallons of ice cream we put into production this month. The cost of beginning inventory combined with the costs incurred this month give us the total production costs we need to account for. We need to take this $90,000 amount and allocate it to the gallons transferred out and the gallons in ending inventory. We also need to make note of our gallons in beginning inventory, gallons put into production during the period, gallons transferred out, and gallons in ending inventory. We'll use those numbers as we perform step 1, determining the units to be assigned costs. Your unit can be any measure that is appropriate for what you're producing. Depending on what you're producing or how its package contents are measured, you may use tons of mineral ore, gallons of milk, pounds of meat, and so forth. As we already mentioned, Frozen Delight measures its units in gallons of ice cream. Remember those 3 categories of inventory we said we would allocate costs among. Group 1, beginning inventory. Group 2, units started and completed. And Group 3, ending inventory. Our calculation is as follows. We start with our beginning inventory and add to it our units started and completed to arrive at units transferred out. Add to that sum our ending inventory, and we have our total units to be assigned costs. Memorize this formula. It is the first thing you write down when you begin a process costing problem. Also note that the sum of your units started and completed and ending inventory is what you received from the previous department or put into production for the period. In this case, the 57,000 gallons started and completed plus the 3,000 gallons in ending inventory ties to the 60,000 gallons put into production for the period from our initial data. Let's try an example exercise to ensure we can fill out that formula. Rocky Springs Beverage Company has 2 departments, blending and bottling. The bottling department received 57,000 liters from the blending department. During the period, the bottling department completed 58,000 liters, including 4,000 liters of work in process at the beginning of the period. The ending work in process was 3,000 liters. How many liters were started and completed in the bottling department during the period? Start by writing out our formula. Beginning inventory plus units started and completed equals units transferred out. Add to that number ending inventory, and we have units to be assigned costs. Let's work through the various leaders in the problem and determine where they fit in our formula. Then we can figure out our leaders started and completed. What about the 57,000 liters received from blending? Remember, our units received will reconcile to our liters started and completed plus our ending inventory. If that's a little hard to comprehend, imagine it like this. Our inventory moved from the blending department to bottling to finished goods. Everything we start working on this month in the bottling department, we received from blending. Of everything we received from blending, some of it we finished and transferred to finished goods. What was moved to finished goods is what we started and completed. The inventory is still in bottling is there because although we started it, we did not complete it. This is our ending inventory. What about the 58,000 liters we did complete? What we completed is what we transferred out. The 4,000 liters in beginning inventory is just that, our beginning inventory. Now that we've identified our beginning inventory and units transferred out, how much is our units started and completed? 54,000 liters. We know where ending inventory goes, so our total units to be assigned costs is 61,000 liters. It's very important that you commit this formula to memory for process costing. It's your starting off point for just about every problem. If it helps, write it out like this. Beginning inventory plus units started and completed plus ending inventory equals units to be assigned costs. Next, commit to memory that beginning inventory plus units started and completed equals units transferred out. Likewise, units started and completed plus ending inventory equals what we received from the previous department. Next, we compute the equivalent units of production. Equivalent units is an easy concept to comprehend. When you see inventory referred to as whole units, that just means the number of units in production, regardless of whether they are completed or not. In the beginning inventory of Frozen Delights mixing department, the 5,000 gallons of ice cream are considered to be 5,000 gallons, even though they are not complete. Equivalent units are how many completed units do our partially completed whole units equal. In other words, how many completed units could we have made with the time, energy, and resources we used to make our partially complete whole units? If that's abstract, imagine you make tennis balls, and you have 4 tennis balls 25% complete. 4 tennis balls 25% complete are the equivalent of 1 whole tennis ball. In other words, equivalent units are just the number of whole units multiplied by their percent complete. To calculate our equivalent units for Frozen Delights mixing department, look back at some of our data from our initial cost information for the month. We know our cost of beginning inventory, including how much of that cost pertains to direct materials versus conversion costs. We also know our materials, labor, and overhead costs incurred during the period. Frozen Delights mixing department adds all materials at the very beginning of production. Again, think about how you make homemade ice cream. You typically add all the ingredients into the bucket before you start churning. You don't need to stop part way to add more cream or flavoring. This means that materials and conversion costs are incurred at different rates. so we will need to calculate their equivalent units separately. That said, with respect to beginning and ending inventory, they are 70% and 25% completed in terms of conversion costs, respectively. If you're having trouble imagining the two costs being separate, imagine this box represents our beginning inventory in the mixing department. Because direct materials and conversion costs enter production at different rates, we need to track those costs separately. Our conversion costs are added gradually throughout the mixing process. It's not like as soon as we start mixing the ingredients, they are fully integrated into the ice cream and at the proper temperature and consistency. It takes time. After a certain amount of time, the unit is 25% mixed, then 50%, then 80%, then 100% mixed. Again, the conversion costs are incurred gradually as we move to completion. In contrast, all direct materials are added at the very beginning of mixing, so as soon as we dump everything into the mixing vat, we're done incurring material costs. So let's start allocating our production costs using process costing. First, write out the formula. This is step 1 from our 4-step process we did a few slides ago. We can now perform step 2 and calculate our equivalent units for direct materials and conversion costs. To figure our equivalent units we could have manufactured this period, we need to determine what percent of materials and conversion costs were added this period. Keyword, this period. Time for a new animation. Imagine this box represents our partially completed beginning inventory in mixing for July. In what month was the beginning inventory manufactured? Think about it. We came in on the morning of July 1st, and this beginning inventory was waiting for us. It was manufactured in June. As soon as we clock in on July 1st, we need to finish our beginning inventory. So those costs were incurred in July, this month. Once we've finished beginning inventory, we can move it to packaging. With beginning inventory completed, we can then start on the first batch of ice cream for the current month. The inventory we start and complete within the month gets transferred to packaging along with our beginning inventory. The inventory we started but did not complete is our ending inventory for July. The ending inventory for July becomes the beginning inventory for August. Then the process repeats itself. The beginning inventory as of August 1st was manufactured the previous month, July. The first costs we incur in August go to finishing beginning inventory. We move beginning inventory to packaging, then start on August batch. The gallons we start and then complete also get transferred to packaging. The inventory not completed is our ending inventory for August, which becomes our beginning inventory for September, and the cycle continues. All that said, focusing on direct materials and referencing the month's cost information, what percent of direct materials were added in the current month? 0. Remember, all materials are added at the start of production, and our beginning inventory was started last month, so we didn't add any materials this month. To get our equivalent units, multiply the 5,000 whole units by 0% to get 0. What about units started and completed? What percent of materials were added this month? 100%. Because all materials are added at the start of production, and because we started on this inventory this month, we added 100%. Also, if inventory is completed, it must be 100% done. Thus, the equivalent units of what we started and completed this month for direct materials is 57,000 gallons. Total equivalent units transferred to packaging is just the sum of those two numbers. What about ending inventory? What percent of materials were added this month? 100%. Again, as soon as we started on this inventory in the current month, we added all the materials it needs. Equivalent units of ending inventory, 3,000 gallons. Total equivalent units to be assigned costs for direct materials is 60,000 gallons. Next, we'll do conversion costs. If beginning inventory was 70% complete with respect to conversion costs, what percent of conversion costs were added this month? 30%. Remember, conversion costs are incurred gradually throughout the mixing process. Multiply the 5,000 whole units by 30% to get 1,500 equivalent units. What percent was added to units started and completed? 100%. If we completed the inventory, it must have received all of its necessary conversion costs. Finally, what percent of conversion costs were added to ending inventory? Ending inventory was 25% complete as of the end of the period. So think about it. We started on ending inventory this month. As soon as we started on it, it was 0% mixed. And by July 31st, it was 25% mixed. That means we added 25% this month. Total equivalent units of conversion costs to be assigned costs is 59,250 gallons. Step 3. We'll next determine the cost per equivalent unit. To get our cost per equivalent unit, we take our costs incurred during the month and divide it by equivalent units. We need to calculate a separate cost per EU for direct materials and conversion costs. Look back at our cost information to get our direct materials cost for July. Take that $66,000 and divide it by our equivalent units to be assigned costs for materials. The cost per EU for direct materials is $1.10. Repeat the same process for conversion costs. Total conversion costs incurred in July, $17,775. Divide that number by the 59,250 gallons of equivalent units for conversion costs, and the cost per EU is 30 cents. Step 4. Allocate cost to units transferred out and partially completed units. Remember that our equivalent units are in gallons, and we need to convert them into dollars. We can do so by multiplying each of those equivalent unit items by their cost per EU. The end result is we'll know the dollar values for our finished beginning inventory, inventory started and completed, inventory transferred out, and ending inventory. We began the month with $6,225. That's our first amount on the beginning inventory row. Next, multiply the equivalent units for materials and conversion costs by their respective cost per EU. We spent $450 of conversion costs to finish our beginning inventory. The total cost of beginning inventory transferred out, $6,675. Next, do the same for equivalent units started and completed during the month. Total cost of units started and completed, $79,800. The total cost of inventory transferred out, $86,475. Do the same thing for ending inventory. Total cost of ending inventory as of July 31st, $3,525. Total cost accounted for, $90,000. Look back at our cost data, and you'll see that we allocated all of our production costs for the month. If all that was a little confusing for you, maybe the following animation will help you visualize what we just did. Imagine this box represents our beginning inventory of 5,000 gallons, which are 70% complete with respect to conversion costs. The equivalent units of those 5,000 whole units are 3,500 gallons. We added the remaining 30% of conversion costs this month. Their equivalent units are 1,500 gallons. As for units started and completed, these received 100% of their conversion costs for the month. Thus, the equivalent units of these 57,000 whole units are 57,000 gallons. As for our ending inventory of 3,000 gallons, they are 25% complete, which yields 750 equivalent units. We can now total our equivalent units manufactured in July. Divide those total equivalent units into our conversion costs incurred in July, and our cost per EU for conversion costs is 30 cents. Multiply that cost per EU by the equivalent units manufactured this month for those three inventory categories to get their dollar values. The dollar value of our beginning inventory was already provided. Consider now direct materials. Again, imagine this box represents our beginning inventory of 5,000 gallons in whole units. We said our beginning inventory is 70% complete, but we also said that all direct materials are added at the very beginning of production. For beginning inventory, production began last month, so all 100% of materials are present as of the beginning of the month. The equivalent units for our beginning inventory is therefore 5,000 gallons. We started and completed 57,000 gallons. Again, because all materials were added as soon as we began production, these units are 100% complete with respect to materials. Equivalent units are 57,000 gallons. Ending inventory consists of 3,000 gallons that are 25% complete, but because all materials were added as soon as we began production on these units, they are 100% complete in terms of direct materials. Their equivalent units are thus 3,000 gallons. We then determine our total equivalent units manufactured in July by summing our amounts for units started and completed and ending inventory. We exclude beginning inventory because those equivalent units were manufactured last month. We then take our direct material cost incurred in July and divide it by our equivalent units. We can then convert our equivalent units manufactured in July into dollar amounts by multiplying them by that cost per EU. Our dollar value for beginning inventory was already provided. Here you can see our work summarized. Our cost of beginning inventory is $6,225, $5,000 of direct materials, and $1,225 of conversion costs. We spent $450 of conversion costs completing beginning inventory. So the total cost of beginning inventory is $6,675. For the units we started and completed during the month, we spent $62,700 in direct materials and $17,100 in conversion costs, their total cost being $79,800. For ending inventory, we spent $3,300 of direct materials and $225 of conversion costs. Sum up all our costs, and we reconcile to the total $90,000 of production costs we must account for. Lastly, we'll look at the weighted average cost method for process costing. If you can memorize the process for the FIFO method, the average cost method is much the same with a few less steps and some minor changes. Let's consider a competitor to Frozen Delights, S&W Ice Cream Company. Like Frozen Delights, S&W has a mixing and packaging department. Here you can see the manufacturing data for S&W's mixing department. Like with Frozen Delights, we need to prepare a cost of production report to determine the dollar value of inventory transferred to packaging and inventory still in mixing as of the end of the month. To simplify these calculations, let's imagine that both materials and conversion costs are incurred at the same rate. This means that we can calculate a single cost per EU for both materials and conversion costs. We need to account for 65,000 gallons of product. Begin the process by writing out our formula for units to be assigned costs. Here we see our beginning inventory and our units to be assigned costs from this information. Looking back at the rest of our data, we can confirm our beginning inventory. We can also identify our ending inventory. The cost of goods transferred to packaging is our units transferred out. So our units started and completed is 57,000 gallons. Please note how our materials received ties out to our units started and completed plus our ending inventory. Step 1 provides these numbers in whole units, so we need to convert them into equivalent units. Because both materials and conversion costs enter production at the same rate, we don't need to separate them. For the average cost method, we don't need to do anything with beginning inventory or units started and completed. Because we're calculating an average, we'll just take all the units transferred out and divide that into all of our costs incurred for this inventory. Consequently, we start our calculation with units transferred out, which are 100% complete. Their equivalent units, 62,000 gallons. Ending inventory is 25% complete, so that is the percentage of costs added in the current month for those items. Their equivalent units, 750 gallons. The total equivalent units to be assigned costs sums to 62,750 gallons. To get our cost per EU, we take our costs accumulated through July as opposed to those incurred in July and divide them by the aforementioned total equivalent units. The total cost incurred through July will include the cost of beginning inventory. This is why we can begin the process by calculating the equivalent units for inventory transferred out. An average cost entails taking everything we transferred out and dividing it into all the costs incurred for that inventory to date. Our cost per EU works out to $1.42. Finally, for step 4, we simply convert those equivalent units into dollar amounts by multiplying them by the cost per EU. If you want to check your work, the total cost of units accounted for should tie to the total production cost from our information. That concludes this presentation. You'll find the solutions to the workbook problems in another video. I highly recommend giving that one a watch if you haven't already. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for watching.